Fine.
All right. Hello, Paul Palango. This is and happy Father's Day to you, Paul. It's June 15th. This is episode 15th of Dispersing the Fog. Welcome, everybody. And yeah, welcome, Paul. And today is,
Well, happy Father's Day to you.
hey, thank you very
But
much.
you're sort of more closer to the ground on the father's thing. I've sort of superannuated. I've gone beyond that. I'm sort of the grandfather's day
The
now.
job, the main job is finished. Well, I've
Yeah,
got,
the main job is finished.
I,
That car is left, and
this is how Father's Day can work. So yesterday, my son and I drove to the store to buy Father's Day cards, and I bought my own Father's Day card. So we'll deal with that. That's all right though.
did you
He
get
wrote,
something touching?
well, it was nice. It was a little over the top maybe, but he ended up writing some nice stuff on it in addition. So that's the part that's really meaningful. So no, very good. Good stuff. And so happy Father's Day to all the fathers and father figures out there. Got lots to talk about, Paul. We had an exciting, so lots of response to our podcast and the pot and the video last week where we went through the clips. That wasn't the only time we did that though, because we also went through some clips, or you did at the old Triangle last Sunday for the launch of Anatomy of a Cover-Up. And look at that poster over your right shoulder there. That was a good time.
That it was unbelievable. The book launch party. I was worried it'd be a little too long, and it did get up to 3 hours. I think it was two
Nobody
or
left.
three. Huh?
Nobody left early.
Nobody left. It was very moving, and one of the things I wanted to do was address one of my main criticisms of the Mass Casualty Commission, which was they eliminated certain people from testifying, 16 people who were close to Wortman or the scene, and felt that it would be too traumatic for them to testify and revisit this. And those are the people, many of those are the people I brought up to
Well,
speak.
yeah.
Jerry Murphy, Autumn Ducet, people who were really close to the scene.
Well, that was the major failing of the mass casualty that we never heard from any of these people. Like Jerry Murphy, I met, I think for the first, I think I had met him once before, but I really spoke to him for a while on Sunday. And there was a guy that was, you know, right there in the middle of the action on the night in question, and nobody really has heard from him other than, through you now.
Well, they didn't want to talk to him because Jerry Murphy's story put the lie to parts of the RCMP's early story, where
Yeah.
they said, we went into the community, we rescued people, we got them to safety, we did this and that. And Jerry Murphy lived across the street and just down the road from Gabriel Wortman. And at 11:15, like an hour and 15 minutes after the first 911 call, they've heard shots, then they notice the fires and all of this stuff. Then they're wandering around the community. They're knocking on the door of the Griffins, where Peter Allen Griffin, the ex-con, lived, trying to help rescue them. They run into cops on the in a ditch, giving the cops directions how to get to the Griffin house. They were driving around unprotected. Nobody wanted that story to be told because it would look bad on the Mounties. And I think people were really moved by Jerry.
I thought so, and they certainly were in the room. We also heard from Scott McLeod, who we've had on this podcast. Scott McLeod gave he's been on the implementation committee, one of the reps from the family group, and I thought it was really interesting. Paul, do you know the background of this? Scott McLeod noted that as a gift, the implementation committee gave a nice piece of glass art to all the family reps, and it was from Kilnard.
From
Of
us,
all
we
places.
made it.
Like, that's so crazy for that to
We
happen.
didn't know about it. We didn't know that they'd done that. But one of our longtime customers is Myra Freeman, who is the former lieutenant governor of Nova Scotia and who's the current chair of the implementation committee. And she didn't buy it. I don't think she bought it directly from us, but we the government of Nova Scotia buys glass from us for its gift bank,
Yeah.
and I guess she got it from the government gift bank.
The other, so I thought that was pretty wild. But the other person that was there, I got a chance to meet and have a good chat with was Yvonne Colbert. Colbert. I used to,
Obert.
Colbert, uh, spouse of the late Rick Howe and a reporter in her own right. And so we were talking about, her work doing, consumer advocacy work. And I was laughing because it always seemed like, the news story would be like, oh, and when they were contacted by Yvonne Colbert, all of a sudden things happened, like as though it was just a total coincidence, right? And anyway, she had a good laugh about all that.
Well,
That was very moving when she spoke, I thought.
well, it was very moving when she spoke, but she sort of admonished me for surprising her
Oh,
because I didn't tell her what I had done, and you know what I did. I dedicated the book in
yeah,
part to her, to Rick Howe, her husband who died last year or so. And Rick was the talk show host in Halifax who helped drive this story, and at least my version of the story, and gave me lots of airtime to talk about it and basically interview people on air. Um, she was shocked when she opened the book and all moved, and I thought I wanted to give her a nice surprise, so it worked
yeah.
out.
That was a really nice surprise, and just the way it was done was nice. And then you brought her up to speak and brought people up to speak that weren't always necessarily prepared to speak either,
No,
which
no one
I
was
thought it,
prepared. I wanted people to be spontaneous
yeah.
and not to have a prepared speech, you know? And so basically, when we ran a clip, we ran about 10 clips from the book, like we did last week on the podcast.
Mm.
And then I became sort of like looking in the audience. I want you to speak about this, you
Yeah.
know?
That was great. People, a lot of the times, people, if they know they're going to speak, then it really affects their whole experience of the event, and they can't focus on anything until they're finished. And so that way, it kind of gave them the freedom to just enjoy themselves. And then when they were, oh, all right, I'll say a few things, and everybody spoke very well. So I thought it worked very nicely.
And I thought the last thing, the one person I enjoyed bringing up, because as I said, last week in the podcast, I believe I said, the RCMP is good at Mr. Big Stings, and we did a Mr. Little Sting, as it were, on the RCMP and the MCC in doing what we did to get the information out that we've got out. And the person I called up, the smallest person in the room, Autumn Ducet,
Yeah.
was the mother of Dean Dillman, who basically proves the case that the RCMP likely accidentally shot Corrie Ellison.
Yeah.
And she told her story about being there and that night and what was going on. I thought it was very, very sort of powerful.
Well, I want to get into we're going to circle back to that chapter in the book on Corey Ellison because boy, that's important. It's unbelievable that this is anyway, we talk about things that can be kept a secret, but we're going to come back to that because I want to talk about some aspects of the book that have been, I don't know, sinking in on people. Certainly, there's that. There's the Heidi Stevenson situation. We don't have to talk about it all today, but this is some stuff we'll cover over the next few episodes. And tonight, this we'll talk about the Corey Ellison situation.
Before we go on, I
Yeah,
should tell you some of the other things that have gone on this week
yeah,
because I've done a lot of radio interviews and podcasts right across the country and elaborating on a lot of this stuff. I did a couple of events I was at Chapters yesterday in Halifax, Coal Store in New Minas on Friday, and it's really interesting to see who's coming out. I mean, it's really, really interesting. Like we had a bunch of ex-law enforcement, ex-Mounties come out to some of both locations in the last 2 days. But not only are they coming out and well, first of all, they're coming out, but then you see people walking by going, and this is typical rural Nova Scotia. They see my book and they go, I'm not reading that. I don't want to read that. and sort of a look of disgust on their face. I mean, to the point where I'm told the cold store in Truro, Nova Scotia won't carry the book because
Oh.
local people don't want to read about it. It sort of put their head in the sand. We support the RCMP, and see, no speak, no hear. Go away, Mr. Palango, Mr. Rogers, and all you people who are talking about this.
Well, that's
Um,
a peculiar way to a thing. Anyway, I always think it's very curious when people try to ban a book or keep people from reading it. It seems destined to make it more enticing to the many others that might be interested.
oh, absolutely, and keeping it out of bookstores. Well, people who want to read it, they get it through Amazon, or they get it online, or they get digital form, they get the audio form. And that seems to be what's going on. But what is happening right now in this week? The book Anatomy of a Cover-Up. I'm showing how a cover-up worked. Um, and in the meetings I've had and in some of the phone calls and messages I've received in the last week, it's like the dam is starting to burst. Like people are coming forward saying, I'm at chapter 20 in your book. And it's obvious you don't know this. This happened. It was kept from the MCC. You should know this. Other people
Wow.
coming forward saying, this is something else. This is what happened. This is what happened to this person. And they were sort of hidden. So I get the feeling that we're well into the next stage of the story where the dam is about to burst. And that gets into the nature of conspiracies. When I started out doing, in 22 murders, you see over in the book there,
Yeah.
the subtitle is The Cover Up. Well, how did you know it was a cover up? Well, my experience. I could see what they were doing. And then I would have ex-Mounties, especially from the RCMP Veterans Association, call me up and say, you're a conspiracy theorist, the old saying, three can keep a secret if two are dead. You can't have a big conspiracy.
Yeah.
And that comes from the Masons or the Masonic Lodge, that sort of idea. What do you think about conspiracies?
Oh, me? Well, it's funny, right? Because they're it seems like they're so difficult. Like when in the criminal law world now, that's a subset that's not always, in the Mensa categories. But you're like, well, if people are trying to keep a secret, it seems very difficult. Somebody is always seems like somebody's gonna tell, somebody's gonna come out with the real story, somebody's gonna slip up along the way, and it's tough. But you look back through history, and there seems like there may have been some big conspiracies that have actually been covered up. The JFK stuff, Area 51. You wonder, all right, do people really know this stuff? And then, if anybody is a big West Wing fan, there was a scene there where the president had, there was 12 members of the Joint Chiefs and some other officials in the room and all this stuff. And the president was on the phone with somebody, and they, basically ordered somebody to be assassinated. And the president hangs up, and he's saying to his like chief of staff, "Well, we can't let that one out." And the president's like, "What do you mean? There's like a dozen people in here." And the guy's like, "They've kept bigger secrets than that."
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you're like, all right, maybe that really does happen in real life. Why wouldn't it? Look at
Well,
all even the stuff this week. All right, so the attacks on Iran, right? Well, geez, did President Trump know and his people know about that? They didn't seem to let on. They did. I think there's lots of people keeping big secrets.
the whole three can keep a secret aphorism, was conceived by Franklin, who published the first book, The Constitution of the Freemasons, the first Masonic book published in the United States in the mid 1700s. And by then, there were already large conspiracies. I see it as one of what Franklin said was, what do they call? I have a brain cramp here. Um, Gaslighting.
Oh yeah.
it's the first example of gaslighting that I could find where you're telling people, oh, there's no such thing as a large conspiracy because, you know, somebody's going to give it up. And then I found this study in 2016 from Oxford University, a guy named Dr. David Robert Grimes, who was into all kinds of science related things. And he was looking at science related conspiracies. And Grimes, and without getting into his methodology, Grimes wrote, for a plot to last 5 years, the maximum number of people involved was 2,521.
All right. That's quite a few people.
Yeah, and for it to last 10 years, no more than 1,000 people can be involved. And for a straightforward cover-up of a single event, you can't have 100 more than 125 collaborators for it to last a long time, like a century.
All right. Well, yeah,
So
that's
there
still
are
a lot of
large,
people.
yeah, and that's a lot of people. And we know of conspiracies like the Catholic Church hiding pedophile priests, the Dreyfus scandal. Where's Jimmy Hoffa's body? Everybody
Yeah.
seems to know that.
Yeah.
And and so these conspiracies last a long time. And what's happening here by writing, Anatomy of a Cover-Up and showing conclusively, documenting how the cover-up worked. Two things about that. One, I've been saying for a week on radio and podcasts across the country, who shot Corrie Ellison? They faked Heidi Stevenson's supposed gunfight, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
What's the one thing we haven't heard? A word from the RCMP or the government saying, oh, that Palango guy's a conspiracy theorist.
I know. Like, there's been I've been looking at the news, just checking in to see what the reaction has been, waiting for somebody to come out and say, this guy's full of it. This was all exposed at the mass casualty, whatever. Like, here's how you prove that he's way off. And there's been nothing of the sort.
Yeah, and we should do sort of a Deadpool sort of vote or lottery on when will the first major news story from the legacy media or alternative media come out about this?
Okay. Now, Paul, you need to update your Deadpool reference because you're thinking of the Dirty Harry
Not that Deadpool, yeah.
movie, not the you're thinking of the Dirty Harry movie, not the Ryan Reynolds movie, just for everybody's reference,
Yeah.
which was a much better movie, by the way.
Like,
Good book.
just picking, like when will the media sort of say, wait, this Palango guy has written a book saying that the RCMP are suspected based on the evidence and the lies and misdirection in their own reports and in the Mass Casualty Commission, they're suspect in shooting one of the victims. Gabriel Wortman may have killed 20 or 21, not 22.
Yeah.
And that's one of the roots of the cover-up. You think somebody would say, well, we got to go over that. What's he saying here? And I think it's pretty conclusive. I think they're quiet because they can't argue against their own evidence.
It's a I mean, it's a pretty startling allegation for them to just lay, and not respond to it in any way. In this book that's published, that's out in the world, you're saying that the RCMP shot a civilian and covered it up. And here it is. It's been out for almost a week and there's been no reaction from the RCMP. You think of these conspiracies and secrets. Who keeps secrets really well? Well, lawyers do. I mean, we're obligated to. We've got secrets that we can never reveal. Okay. Military, they keep secrets. They have, highly classified information. They are not to reveal it. Where are the police in that situation? They're maybe a little closer to the military, a paramilitary kind of stuff. Have they kept these secrets and successfully done so? I mean, we haven't heard any RCMP leaks necessarily, but I'm surprised that they haven't
But it's
reacted.
coming. It's coming. The real story is there, and I think it's about to burst out. We've had people telling us who the likely Mountie was that shot Corey Ellison.
Yeah.
I had someone at one of my book events come up and say, what I should be looking at is another thing I should be looking at, and one of the mysteries is a superintendent named Julie Moss, who was in New Minas. She was one, in my first book, I described all these couples who were shifted from Vancouver in the RCMP and took over top jobs in Nova Scotia. Um, Julie Moss was supposed to be the incident commander of Portapic the next day. And I was told by someone that, and this was a mystery to me, what happened to her. They said she disappeared the day after Portapic and was never back, never came back. She just hung it up. And the
Okay.
speculation was Superintendent Julie Moss saw or heard something that she couldn't live with. She was a legacy Mountie, a generational Mountie. I think her family were Mounties. And whatever happened was so distressing to her, she never came back. Of course, she's not saying anything. I'd never
Yeah.
been able to get a hold of her, but someone came out of the woodwork and said, examine her.
Well, that's interesting. That might be an example if she's been, steeped in the RCMP, if it's been multiple generations or whatever. For somebody to be disillusioned like that, it might be a moral injury situation. We saw this in the Desmond inquiry where, soldiers sent off to do terrible things in other countries come back and they have a hard time with it, right? Hard time reconciling it to who they thought they were. Well, maybe there's a situation here where she's like, geez, man, I'm part of the RCMP and this is the way we carry ourselves, and this goes against that, and I can't accept it.
Yeah, and that's what's happened. A lot, I had a former high-ranking Mountie call the other day, and he said, "Look at who left." And it's just funny. He told me this, and then this information about Julie Moss came afterwards.
Yeah.
Look who left the force right away, who took retirement, what are they doing? Those are the people who know what really happened. And he said they just couldn't take it anymore. They just took their pension or whatever and got out because it defied their everything they believed in. And you're seeing a lot of that. And one more thing,
Yeah.
another person, well, two people have come forward and said, one of the names in the book, An Anatomy of a Cover-Up, and this is sort of pointing to the next book, basically, the third leg of this story, that we should be looking at, and I'm looking for information about this person, was Superintendent Archie Thompson.
Hmm.
In his testimony at the MCC, Archie Thompson said, I was home all night. And then he's famous or infamous for attending the command center in Great Village on the night of the morning after the Portapic massacres, and basically taking a position along the wall and not getting involved in the process because he said everything was going fine and I didn't want to interfere with anyone. And he was the ranking commander. He ran Eastern and Northern Nova Scotia for the RCMP. In the book, I point out that I had sources that said Thompson was not home that night, that he was out all night, came back in the morning, got his gun, his personal rifle, and went back on the road. I suspect the real story lies somewhere in what Archie Thompson did and didn't do. And I need people to come forward to talk about that.
Paul, you can't stop in a way like that's if people respond to you in a certain way, like they want to provide you information, and you you may be forced into a trilogy here with this story.
Well, as I said, without, I know we're not supposed to be going there right now, but if there's a trilogy, I mean, the working title right now is Who Shot Corrie Ellison?
Yeah.
Because I firmly believe it wasn't Gabriel Wortman. And I concur with his Corey's brother Clinton, who earlier said, I think the Mounties accidentally shot my brother. And I think the evidence supports that.
Well, let's go into that because I was reading through this chapter specifically yesterday, and pleased to see that an excerpt from my blog when I was covering the mass casualty at the time, I was doing these written summaries on a daily basis following the hearings. And then I also did a little 10-15 minute video to just try to explain things to people, like, well, why the legal things happen in a certain way. So in this Corrie Ellison chapter, there was an excerpt from there, which it's funny, the things that I kind of remembered these and I don't. I was at a legal aid conference. I'm a managing lawyer at one of the legal aid offices now. So I'm running into some of these people now, who the lawyers who were involved in the mass casualty. And I was not critical of Jennifer Cox in this chapter, but she was involved. So there were two expert reports, one from Blake Brown from St. Mary's, criminology professor, and another one from these professors from the States, expert reports. And my point that you reproduced was like, well, why is a lawyer for the Mass Casualty Commission, talking about these reports when we could have the experts themselves here to tell us about their reports and what they found, potentially be cross-examined by some of the lawyers to delve into the report a little more and not just take their presentation in a certain. So that was interesting. And here I was at a conference last week, sitting next to Jennifer Cox, and talking about anything else but about that. But uh, yeah, so I thought that was that. All right, so I was pleased to see pleased to be included in the chapter. But
Well, I never consulted with you. I just read everything.
yeah,
And I thought that you were right on point when you looked at this is how the cover-up worked. They took real evidence or avoided real evidence, summarized people's what they said. Nobody was allowed to ask questions. The lawyers weren't asked for the families, and others weren't allowed to ask probing questions or test the evidence. And as a lawyer, you picked up on that, and I thought that should be recognized.
well, thank you. But as an investigator, I'll compliment you back, Paul. As an investigator, you noticed the links. So what I thought, all right, well, the problem I saw with the forensic data around the Corey Ellison situation was they presented it in a very, all right, this victim, this bullet type, blah blah blah, and it was as dry as you could possibly make it. And then they had Jennifer Cox do these two presentations in between. And then the third part of the day was an actual expert that was trying to link back to the first set of forensic data, right? And I was like, well, if you were trying to present this in a way for people to understand it, you would have combined those first and third aspects and just had, all right, here's what the forensics tell us, here's the bullet type, and then the person to say, and here's what that means, instead of breaking it up into two separate parts. That would be very difficult to reconcile unless you do the work that you did. So it seemed to me one of the prime examples of the Mass Casualty Commission deliberately either making things boring or confusing or difficult to put the pieces together. And so I thought, anyway, it was a good thing to pick up on, because that's, you think, all right, if there's a cover up, if there's a conspiracy, then that's the kind of stuff you would do, right? You would, all right, we have to present it, but we'll present it in this way that'll make it like, okay, we're just going to ignore that forensic stuff. It was so boring and dull, and technical, and you just move on to the next part, right? And that's
Yeah,
what I think a lot of people did.
and the other, yeah, the journalists, well, there's nothing sexy in this. We can't get our teeth into it. And I think we mentioned this last week. I mean, the other thing about Corey Ellison that stands out is that the pathology reports were dry, just as dry. So and so victim died from gunshot wound. No description of the gunshot wound, where it was, because that would be too traumatizing to the families.
Yeah.
No sort of record of how many shots were people received. What was obvious, and if you read closely, is that Wortman was a marksman. Everyone said that.
Yeah.
Rob the Carpenter said Wortman could hit, knock the cap off a beer bottle from like 150 yards with a rifle. He was very accurate. Plus, he was using a laser sight on one of his guns.
Yeah.
Most people he killed with one shot. Jolene Oliver, Aaron Tuck's wife, was in the hallway behind him. She sort of turned to run. He got one shot, then finished her with a second shot. He shot Emily Tuck, one shot. That's what he did. he was good at it. Corrie Ellison's pathology report was leaked for a second, like someone accidentally put it on the website, it seems, and it showed he'd been shot 5 times. And then it was withdrawn. But Ryan Potter, the citizen investigator, was on top of it and took a copy of it when it was the brief time it was up. He took a copy, so we had an example of the 5 shots. Who shoots 5 times at someone? Gabriel Wortman doesn't have to. And then this raises other questions. They said there was a blood speck on blood specks from Lisa McCulley and Corrie Ellison on Wortman's boots.
Yeah.
He was in close contact with other people. Why weren't there blood specks on his shoes?
But I wondered, Paul, like where were all like these other people killed at close range, and he's wearing the same boots? You'd think
Aaron Tuck, he was
yeah,
staying face to face in the doorway with him.
you think it would have been all over him, right? And
You know,
that was very
he walked
curious.
past, he
Yeah.
shot Greg Blair on the porch, and then walked over his body, and then shot Jamie Blair. Um, why does he have no one else? It suggests that the evidence was doctored to me because Lisa McCauley was on the other side of her fence. How did Wortman, if Wortman actually shot her, how did he get so close that he got a blood residue on his boot?
Yeah.
The official story is Corey Ellison leaned into the car and Wortman shot him as he leaned into the car. How did the speck get on his boot in the wheel well of the car?
Yeah, that's an unusual trajectory too. You look at these things. I know, and I've seen blood cases and blood DNA samples used in cases, and they don't need a lot of blood to get those samples. And so it was curious to me as to why there was no other individuals on his shoe, and yeah, why Corey, if he's leaning into the car. Anyway, you don't want to think about it too much, maybe, but it seems like it will go the other way and not back in and down into the wheel well or to the well where the
Well, the interesting thing is Corey Ellison and Lisa McCulley are found dead on either side of Orchard Beach Drive, 20 yards apart, 20 meters apart, maybe 25, I don't know, something like that.
yeah
So Corey is in the sort of the ditch on the west side of Orchard Beach Drive, just south of Wortman's property. Lisa McCulley's on the east side, behind near her fence line. I think her body was leaning up against the fence post.
yeah
But they were shot almost half an hour apart. That's the evidence.
yeah
Lisa McCulley was shot. Her kids are calling at 10:16 p.m. She was shot prior to 10:16 p.m. Somewhere between 10:01 and 10:16. Corey Ellison was shot at 10:40:12.
yeah. We know basically exactly when he was shot because of
Yeah,
the
we know exactly from his camera.
yeah
So half an hour apart, why did Wortman get blood specks on his shoes half an hour apart from only those two bodies and no one else?
yeah
I would suggest that, as I said, it's very suspicious and it warrants reinvestigation.
No, it definitely defies belief, and the other aspect of that is the timing of it all. When I was looking at this, and I know it seemed like the mass casualty struggled with this too, to try to make it work, make the timing work, and the travel. You know, where did Wortman travel up and down the Orchard Beach Road? Why would he go back down and then back up? It didn't seem to add up, right? So, but the mass casualty needed him to come back up to kill Corey Ellison. They needed to fit that in somehow, but it doesn't fit.
No, it doesn't fit at all. It's banging a square peg into a round hole. Gabriel Wortman would not have gone back to Orchard Beach Drive for the simple reason that he knew the first three 911 calls, at least two of them,
Yeah.
had come from Jamie Blair and McDonald, had come from Orchard Beach Drive.
Yeah. There's the
A
riskiest place
normal
for him to go.
person would expect the area to be flooded with police officers,
Yeah.
unless he had a radio and knew they weren't there, or did he have the time? And as I show in the book, he did not have the time. He did not escape that way. And the RCMP and the Mass Casualty Commission and the Department of Justice clearly colluded to make it look like that happened, even moving Corrie Ellison's body in the map to facilitate the notion that Wortman went south on Orchard Beach Drive when he didn't, because it's clear he didn't go that way.
And then the other important aspect of this, Paul, is that we never heard from these other officers in any real way that were involved in that aspect of it. Like so, uh, until much later in some cases, Constable Grund, want to get
Neil,
his rank, Neil, I can't
how's
remember his
Neil?
rank, and you know, Constable James, like we haven't gotten a full account of those, and certainly didn't get it right up front where it should have been, where it should have had, we should have heard from all of these officers testifying to what they did, and then we could have figured out what exactly happened by putting it all together. But the Mass Casualty Commission didn't allow that to happen. They didn't have these other officers testifying up front or at all in some cases. And so, there's a gap there. There's a black hole of information area that we just don't know. Or well, we I guess I shouldn't say we don't know, but they didn't present it in a way that would encourage people to learn about it.
No, I mean, you brought up you didn't hear from those officers and what was going on. One of the people who attended one of my book events in the last couple of days was a Mountie insider and told me, he said, you've talked about the Mountie who hid in the woods and got rid of their gun, and their gun was found in the woods. And what really happened, they said, is this female Mountie was so scared and so untrained that they went into the woods and threw their gun into the woods and were crying because they were afraid Wortman would get them, get their gun off them, and kill them with their own gun. So they hid their gun. That's why they threw their gun into the woods.
I guess
And
that's
that's the story I
possible.
was told. And that, of course, they didn't want to bring these Mounties in to testify because these are the questions they would be asked. And it would be
Right.
absolutely embarrassing for the force. But as I said, these stories are starting to come out. People are reading the book and they're seeing, hey, that Palango guy and all those guys around him, Rodgers and, you know, Chad Jones and Ryan Potter and all those guys, they're not crazy. They're actually using the evidence and they're showing the story. And they're coming forward because they feel guilty and they want to tell the story. And I encourage them to come forward even more.
Well, you described Constable Grund and Neil as maybe the two most heroic members. I mean, they went against orders and went in and went to get the kids out of there, right? And, you know, the RCMP didn't seem to want to promote those guys as examples of heroism in under the circumstances because they disobeyed. Well, I don't know if they disobeyed orders. They kind of did, though. They went against what they were told, or they went above. They went outside the chain of command to get direction, and then they just decided, I think, to just go.
Yeah, they did. And they were the real heroes in there because there's nothing that Grund and Neil did that could be used against them, saying that, that they did what a police officer should do in that situation. They're brave, courageous, courteous. They preserved life. They are compassionate. They did it all and essentially defied orders to do it.
Yeah.
But everyone else followed in line, and they're hiding the story. And getting back, and I can't emphasize enough when people might say, well, there's no direct evidence that the Mounties may have shot Corey Ellison. but there is
Yes.
inferential evidence. Chris Leather, the chief superintendent, I reiterate, in the first press conference, when asked about what happened, he said, "We're going to make three recommendations, referrals to CERT, the Serious Incident Response Team, the police watchdog, to investigate the shooting of Wortman, the crazy shoot up at the Oslo Belmont Fire Hall, and an exchange of gunfire between the suspect and the Mounties last night." That's what he said. That's almost verbatim, I suspect. And then that all disappeared. It never happened again. And Lisa Banfield, in one of her statements that wasn't, was eventually unredacted, said, "I heard a man say, 'How's it going, boys?' And then bang, 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 bang."
Yeah.
And that disappeared too. And the media never picked it up or never understood what it might mean. By Lisa Banfield's own testimony, she was in that area of the woods. If you believe her, she says that's where she was, near the edge of Wortman's property at that time in the woods hiding.
Yeah.
Um, that's pretty significant. And the very fact that he was shot 5 times, just,
And they couldn't tie the forensics back to any guns that Wortman
and that's the
had.
only case where they couldn't tie the forensics back conclusively. They said they couldn't conclude who fired the shots. That alone is suspicious.
So I wondered, Paul, if the initial reports coming back to Chris Leather were of, well, maybe there was some confusion that it was an officer shooting back and forth with Wortman, and then they're like, no, it wasn't Wortman, it was this other thing, and they're like, okay, well, we're shutting that down then. That's, maybe
Yeah.
his initial report was based on a little bit of a miscommunication, but the actual shooting turned out to be an officer shooting Corrie Ellison, and they're like, okay, well, we're shutting that down, of course, and then we never heard from him any further.
Well, the thing about that press conference, it was so bizarre, as you recall. Uh, Assistant Commissioner, what's her name?
Bergerman.
Bergerman, Lee
Yeah.
Bergerman, and Leather were embarrassing. They were nervous. They spoke for a few minutes. They refused to do, they had no real details. But later on, when the communications people spoke to the MCC about that, they said Leather did a great job.
Yeah.
He was fully briefed on the facts. Their phrase, fully briefed, and we were very careful to be accurate about what he said. And everything he said was accurate. Well, if that's the case, what was this thing about an exchange of gunfire between the gunman and the RCMP, and why did that disappear?
That's right. If the
Who
communications
made
people,
that? Who made that
yeah,
call?
yeah. I mean, if the communications people were being told, like, we have to soft pedal this a little bit. There's lots of things they could have said, things were unfolding quickly. Information was coming in from different sources. Everything wasn't vetted. That was the best we had. And, try to give him some wiggle room there on some of those statements that he made, but they did not do that. They said, nope, it was all solid. I mean, you want to be able to say in answer to a question, all right, did you do the research? Did you have your facts straight? Yes, of course we did. But it's easy to come around, and I think people would have understood if they said, no, it was coming in quickly. We were managing things, from multiple sources, and may have said something that wasn't 100% accurate. I think people would have been
And,
fine with that.
and
That's not what they said.
people may find this unusual, but I'm going to come to the defense of Chris Leather here.
All right.
People I know who, one in my book, former New York Region Detective Tim Cavanaugh, who's been a big help in this story, worked with Chris Leather in York Region. And he describes Leather as a great cop, honest guy, a guy who does a great job and can be counted on to do the right thing. When I look at Chris Leather's performance and how he just botched it the first two press conferences, he was a guy under an extreme stress. Tim told me, he says, he wasn't natural. And then after that, he sort of disappeared into the woodwork. Bergerman, who had her own issues and significant issues, stepped aside. Leather took over, and then he was moved to Ottawa,
Yeah.
out of the limelight. I think the problem, I suspect the problem Leather had was that he was had to live a lie, and it was unnatural for him as a cop to have to do this.
Yeah.
And that was his stress. That's why he was red-faced, because he had to live a lie. He knew what the real story was, like a lot of Mounties. He knew what the real story was, and it was destroying him. I think there's a good chance that's what was happening.
Well, that would make sense, Paul, because you look at his demeanor during that press conference, and it's not somebody that is confident and in charge. It is, yeah, it was somebody that didn't, it seemed uncertain. And maybe, all right, if he's trying to remember two stories at once, and which way am I taking this with every question? That would make it a difficult press conference instead of just, okay, I know what happened. I'll just answer the questions, right? If he's like, I know what happened, but I can't say that, so I'll have to, say something else that fits the construct we've developed here.
And the Corey Ellison thing, the big lie is the big lie in the story, the big cover up is Wortman and his relationship with the RCMP. We can address that another time.
Yeah,
But the next big problem becomes the Corey Ellison thing, and that's the big lie they have to cover up. And then that lie leads to other lies, and it's the old story. One lie begets another lie begets another lie. And then when you go through the whole story, it's one lie after the other. But the root cause at the ground level that day was likely the accidental shooting of Corey Ellison.
yeah. So, Paul, you've had a few events. We had the event at the old Triangle. You're doing well. By the time people see this, you'll have done a book launch at the Halifax Public Library. Hopefully, get a good crowd for that. Any other events coming up? Anything else to tell people where to go for, buy the
The
book at all fine retailers, of course, and online, which is easy.
Yeah, apparently it's doing very, very well. I just got a blip here. I'm listening to the audio right now, former cop.
Yeah.
And right now, this week, I'm doing some interviews, podcasts. I am doing a lot with documentary companies who are interested now in the story. So I have picked up a new agent. Um,
So
uh,
yeah, that's one of the questions, Paul. So who does all this arrangements for you? Or, like, do you do the arrangements yourself? Is
no,
it the book publisher that does it?
I had a literary agent. Now the literary agent has brought in a someone more familiar with film and TV. And as my agent Rob Firing said, you're collecting agents at this stage. This is a really good thing. I don't know how much it's going to cost me, but
Yeah.
uh,
Hopefully it's only percentages.
considering there's been virtually very little money involved in this because Canadian nonfiction you don't make very much
Yeah,
money.
yeah, of course, right? You're not
You make basically starvation wages.
I think
But
people
being
are,
independently wealthy like I am,
yeah,
just
well, fortunately you've got the
yeah,
means
yeah.
to just set aside and write. No, it's great. And the audiobook I think will be very popular too. I was thinking of this when actually I was driving back from Digby last week, and it was like, 4.5 hour drive. And so you think of how much of a book you can get through in drives like that, and it makes the time go by quickly. Actually, I was listening to there's a podcast, Paul, that does arguments. Oh, you probably know this already, that publicizes arguments before the Supreme Court of Canada. So I was listening to some of supposedly at least the top lawyers in the country arguing an appeal. So that could take 3 hours. But it's funny, right? Like it's an enjoyable experience to listen to an intellectual discussion, a book that's of this nature. I think there's something about listening to something intelligent that can set off your mind in a different direction. You might not even be thinking about that thing itself. You can be thinking about anything else at the same time, but it just seems to open up an aspect of a person's brain in a good way. So I
Well,
encourage people to listen to the audiobook too.
the I had two people in the last couple of days come up to me who said, "I'm listening to the audiobook and I love how you do the female voices."
Oh yeah. you I never even thought about that, but
Yeah, I
you pull your Monty
never
Python female
yeah,
voice.
I don't know. I don't know where it came from. But before we go, and we're running late here, but before we go, the other story I really want to talk, I know we got a ton of stories, but one I want to talk about that I think is really important and people should notice. It's Ronda Blackmore, the
Oh yeah.
assistant commissioner of the RCMP in Saskatchewan, was code of conduct kicked out of the force the other day.
Yeah.
And there's like a mystery. What's it about? How could the assistant commissioner of the RCMP in Saskatchewan, the birthplace of the RCMP, suddenly be kicked out? So she's gone. This is similar to Larry Tremblay being kicked out unceremoniously in New Brunswick 2 years ago. Why? Nobody really explains what's going on. These are unprecedented acts. But a couple of things about this that are really interesting. First of all, when Justin Trudeau became prime minister, he insisted that half the top jobs in organizations, the RCMP, the military, whatever, be filled with women. So at one point, five of the top assistant commissioners running of the 10 assistant commissioners running operations in Canada, five were women, five were men. Four of those women have since been let go under ignominious circumstances. Jennifer Strachan in BC, Jody Boudreau in Ontario. Nobody knows what happened to her. Lee Bergerman here, and Blackmore in Saskatchewan.
Yeah.
One was left, Jennifer Ebert. Jennifer Ebert was in PEI, briefly got shipped to Newfoundland, and now she's like running contract policing, and she ran like little tiny police forces. So they're gone. But the other part of this story is that who replaced Rhonda Blackmore on an interim basis was Robin McNeil. Robin McNeil is one of the brothers who was a police officer of former Nova Scotia Premier Stephen.
Okay.
So Robin
Huh.
McNeil, after 3 decades on the Halifax police force, patched over to the RCMP as a super senior policing expert, and now is taken over Saskatchewan. This is the third or fourth incident in the last couple of months where senior former municipal police officers, former police chiefs and whatever, have gone over to the RCMP and given senior posts inside the RCMP. What does this mean? We can speculate.
Yeah, really. It seems significant. Geez, I thought you know, the James Smith Cree Nation stabbings and the inquiry that came out of that. I thought Rhonda Blackmore handled that reasonably well, certainly in comparison to how things were handled in the Mass Casualty Commission and the Portapic shootings and just the fallout after that. It was an improvement. Maybe it wasn't good enough. Anyway, it seems like maybe she had some other things going on. She claims these are anonymous complaints and seems to be trying to fight back a little bit in the media, but she's out. She's out in Saskatchewan.
It's unbelievable because, one of the arguments I make, I think these people were promoted, the women in question and some of the men, but the women in question largely, not all of them. Jennifer Strachan apparently had a more sort of solid background, but many of them were promoted just because they are women. And the problem is they don't have that deep foundational knowledge or touch for how a police force should work. As a former deputy commissioner, Henry Jensen said, you got to have a fine feel for how things work and make it work, like any manager of any large organization. So largely by putting them in these positions, what Trudeau did was set them up to fail
Well, that
because
doesn't do them any
don't they
favors.
don't really
Yeah.
know what they're doing and they don't have the respect of the officers below them.
It doesn't do them any favors individually, and it doesn't do any good for the cause of promoting diversity if you promote people into positions where they're underqualified and they're not going to succeed. And all of a sudden, people say, well, I guess that didn't work for this reason, right? And that's, anyway, yeah, that seems like a big problem.
Because all the women who've been replaced were replaced by men, you
Yeah.
know? I don't think there's even an exception to that. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's not what you're
Well,
trying
even on
to
the
achieve.
national level, Brenda Lucky was replaced not by a female. So,
Yeah, that's right. Brenda Lucky was another one.
so
So, and the issue, it gets down to the issue of what is the role of underqualified people being in policing to serve political purposes, ratios and genders and diversity and stuff like this. A former police officer, Mountie, in fact, who came to one of my events yesterday, said he had views on Heidi Stevenson, who was slain by Wortman at Shubenacadie. We talked about that. We'll get into that another time,
yeah,
but it was no different than what I've described in my books. And he said one of the problems we had in policing, and he articulated it quite. He was standing there with his wife, and she was nodding her head. He says, "I had a partner. If we were on our shift and we had a female partner, soon as she made a traffic stop, all of us on the road would head her way to protect her."
yeah,
He says that's the way it works. And he said, and that's not good for policing because it's not equity, it's disequity.
no, that's true.
And people are worried about their own personal safety when you have underqualified people there, be they men, women, or whatever. But the strongest, the brightest, and the people who have the aptitude for the job should be doing the job, not someone who's there for the paycheck, the pension, and being on school. Their lifelong dream is to be the school liaison officer
Yeah, really. No,
and
it's
get full pay.
so well, Paul, I think that's going to give people this a lot to think about and a lot of reasons to go buy your book, hopefully as well. We're going to talk a little bit more about this next week when we get together and maybe talk about the Heidi Stevenson aspect and that part of the book. And we'll see what else comes up in the meantime when you're out talking to people. Just want to mention one other story that came along. We may talk about this next week. Late Friday. Usually the late Friday news comes from governments that don't want to reveal things. This happened to come from the courts, and it was a decision on the Chignecto Isthmus, a reference from the Nova Scotia government to the Court of Appeal here to see whether the federal or provincial governments should pay for the Chignecto Isthmus repairs to the dike systems and all that stuff. Anyway, I'd watched some of the arguments made on this and was not surprised that our Court of Appeal refused to or declined to answer the question and gave good reasons for that. So I'll maybe talk about that a little bit next week. Not good for the province. Strong arguments from the federal government. So we'll see what happens. The isthmus is not going to flood because of this decision, but it's as far as who pays for it, it'll be jointly shared, I say, by the provincial and federal governments, as everybody kind of predicted it would be. Or at least I did.
Well, for those who don't know what the Chignecto Isthmus is,
Yeah,
it's the little strip of land that connects Nova Scotia to North America, mainland North
yeah,
America.
or vice
And
versa.
a very narrow strip, so it separates the Bay of Fundy from the Gulf of St. Lawrence, both arms of the Atlantic Ocean. And if it floods out, Nova Scotia becomes an island.
Yeah.
Um, that's really the issue. So Nova Scotia's connected is very connection to the rest of North America is very tenuous at the moment.
Bad job by the provincial government and Department of Justice on this one, and we'll get into that a little more maybe next week. Once I'm going to read through the decision again. It's not that long, but anyway, it's pretty. That's it for that court application. So okay, Paul. So where are you off to this week?
I'm just around doing interviews, Zooms, and a few other things, and continuing to investigate and field calls. So if you know something that we don't know that was kept out of the MCC, for example, evidence that was suppressed, like the lady told me about, um,
Track track us
bring it
down. Track
on.
us all down.
Tell me, tell Adam, tell Chad Jones, Ryan Potter, anyone. Tell your local newspaper.
Yeah.
Tell the CBC. I don't care who you tell, but
Right.
tell.
Yeah, tell somebody. So that's great. So by the time we come back next week, well, so if people are selectively reading chapters, read the Heidi Stevenson sections there, and then we'll come back and we'll have a little more on that next week, and lots more stories, no doubt, in the meantime as well. So thanks everybody for watching. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time. Bye.